All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. I am Danielle F. Sorda, and I'll be assisting with moderating for this session. We're doing educational session 3B, right where you left us, moving on and modernizing using ArchivesSpace. I'm going to provide a link to the 2024 SSA virtual meeting rules of engagement for a virtual conference in the chat. Please take time to familiarize yourself with them. The session will be recorded and available after the conference. You can turn closed captioning on by pressing Show Captions in the menu bar at the screen. I'll be monitoring the chat, so if you need help or have any concerns, please reach out to me so we can assist you. And as a reminder, anonymous function in the Q&A. Thanks and enjoy the session.
Alrighty. Well, thank you all for coming to this session. I am Kathryn Slover, and I am the digital archivist at UTA Libraries Special Collections.
And I am Erica Rousseau. I am a digitization production specialist here at UTA Libraries. Today, we're going to be talking about UTA Special Collections and our migration to ArchivesSpace. And if you haven't read our abstract or you don't know what this font or colors are from our screen, this is a Taylor Swift themed presentation. So why Taylor Swift? If it's not immediately obvious, Kathryn and I would consider ourselves Swifties. What might not be so obvious is just how Taylor fits into this archival world that we are in. We were throwing around presentation theme ideas, and it just hit us one day that there is a Taylor Swift lyric for absolutely everything. So why not the archives? We quickly proved ourselves correct, and the lyrics just fell into place as we started doing our work. As you will see throughout our presentation, Taylor's always transforming herself as while we are in our own transformation era here at UTA Special Collections, we felt it was a perfect match. And most importantly, like Taylor, the archives never forget. I do want to note that lastly, we will be paying homage to our inspiration throughout our presentation with little lyrical Easter eggs. So fellow Swifties, keep an eye out for some of our really bad puns that we're about to make.
And if we say something that doesn't quite fit it within the archives and you don't understand the references, probably Taylor Swift related. Okay. So before we jump into sort of the meat of it with the migration and implementation of ArchivesSpace, we wanted to give you a little bit of background on sort of how we got into this modern era. So from what I had been told, there were attempts long before I got here to get some sort of content management system. But when I was hired in 2020, we did not have any sort of archival content management system that we used. We used Tarot for our finding aids, but otherwise everything was sort of a mix of paper records and access databases and spreadsheets in OneDrive and SharePoint on local storage, kind of all over the place. And so you know, it functioned and people worked with it as they needed to, and we did what we needed to get the work done, but there wasn't one system that helped us sort of track all of this and keep all of our information in one spot. Like I said, since I wasn't hired until 2020, I can't say I remember them all too well, but from what I found in our records most recently, the last time we looked into a CMS was in 2018. And like I said, obviously those attempts were unsuccessful. So in 2022, January 2022, so very early in the year, our director of special collections retired, which we're very sad about for those of you who knew Brenda. And two of our associate university librarians took over interim leadership until we could hire a full-time director. You know, our AULs are lovely people and they were good supervisors, but they're not archivists. And so we were naturally just a little bit worried because, you know, libraries and archives have a lot of similarities, but they are different sometimes, right? And so, you know, the way that we manage things and made them accessible is different. And so we were, like I said, a little anxious, but it actually turned out really to be an opportunity because the things that we had grown accustomed to with our numerous information systems in the absence of a content management system or in some cases, established workflows, they noticed those roadblocks immediately because they weren't used to it. And so after numerous Teams messages along the lines of something like, I'm looking for a very specific thing that's uncatalogued or unprocessed, which I'm sure we're all familiar with. One of them said, hey, is there like some sort of a system that can keep track of this? Which was sort of our in to start having these conversations directly with library administration. And so began our journey into the modern era of special collections. Which leads us to the creation of a content management section working group. I'm sure many of y'all have had this experience that libraries love committees and working groups and task force. So this was no different because it wouldn't just be archives and special collections that was impacted. And so we formed a group of several folks from several library departments, including special collections, our IT, who do our systems management as well, access and discovery, who manage our stacks and catalog and other things, to evaluate a content management system solution. And we established a variety of criteria that looked at functionality, accessibility, IT requirements set by the library and the state, and most importantly, the cost, right? That's always a big thing when you're asking for something new, is how much is it going to cost in our budget? And so we had to evaluate all of these things. If anyone is looking to do something similar, we have a very detailed and lengthy spreadsheet we can share, but we've actually used it for several other things at the library. And so it's come in handy because it's just sort of like a, these are things you might want to look for if you're looking for a system like this, whether it's a content management system, a digital repository, we have like the IT requirements are the same across the board. So it was nice not to have to start from scratch. And we can share that with anyone who's interested. So we ended up selecting ArchivesSpace hosted by Lyrasis because it met all of our requirements. The process was mostly smooth, but of course, bringing together folks from different backgrounds and knowledge levels about archives created some bumps in the road. One example is that our representatives from IT and those who worked with our catalog were focused on making sure whatever system we chose could integrate with our integrated library system, which is ALMA, because they said the catalog should be the first point of access for researchers. And that was on the list of criteria, but for the archivists in the group, it wasn't really a top priority because we were like, but you should look at the finding aids for the archives collections. And that should be the first place we point researchers to if they want to look for the primary source materials in UTA Special Collections. We wanted a system that would work for the unique collections and archives. And if it happened to work with ALMA, that would be great. But like that wasn't the top priority for us, but it was one of the top priorities for others in the group. Luckily, ArchivesSpace hosted with Lyrasis allowed for this to happen. And it's something that's still a work in progress with our IT team at the moment. But different folks on the committee prioritize different things. So we had to really work together to understand where each other were coming from and how to balance competing priorities while we were going through this process. Another hiccup we had, and for those of you working in state institutions in Texas, you might be familiar that there is something called TexRAMP certification. And when we first started this search, it was not yet like ruled out that it was a requirement. So it happened sometime in the middle that our IT head of IT was like, oh, we need to add this to the list. It caused some folks to panic a little bit because it wasn't on our original criteria list, and some vendors told us that like it wasn't on their radar to get certified because they didn't need to be. But thankfully, we were looking at systems that other institutions in Texas were already using, and Lyrasis, literally, we asked and they were able to send us their exemption in like, within a day via email. So it all worked out fine, but it was just one of those unexpected things that we then had to go back and be like, oh, we really want to do this option, but can you also provide this thing? But despite some of our roadblocks in the initial search, we decided to shake it off and keep moving forward. Our recommendation was presented and approved in March 2023. We made our case for using a hosted platform and the increased cost with that. We explained the benefits of an archival CMS, but also the fact that it wouldn't be as impacted by staff turnover as some of the systems that we already have that were locally hosted. That had been an issue in the past, so that wasn't too hard of a sell, but still, we still had to justify the cost. Even though the library admin approved it, we waited until our new director was hired and got her final stamp of approval in April 2023 because she's the director of special collections. So we wanted to make sure that everyone was on board, even if they weren't here through the search process. And then we began working on the migration and implementation with Lyrasis last May. And so this part, it took quite a bit to sort of get from the planning stages to the exploration to making that decision. But overall, we were really excited to move into the migration. And I think one of the important things to remember here is the power in advocacy for your institution or your repository. It can be intimidating asking for what you want, and in many cases what you need for your archive, right? For a variety of reasons. There are power dynamics at play, there is money involved. But I think embracing being fearless is the way to move forward. And you might be told no, but if you never ask for exactly what you want, you're definitely not going to get it. And so that's just sort of a lesson learned, which we'll share more of those later, but from this stage in the project.
So we have gotten the thumbs up, the go ahead to move forward with ArchivesSpace, but first we needed to do a ton of preparation work for our migration. As we go into the next couple of sections, migration and implementation, you'll notice that some of the tasks coincide with each other. And that's because we absolutely experienced a ton of overlap in doing this. Some of our migration prep steps we thought were done, and then we kind of had to go back and revisit those as we were implementing our instance of ArchivesSpace. So if it gets a little confusing, ask a question in the chat. We can definitely clear some of that stuff up at the end. But I just want to let you know that some of this does kind of crosswalk to each other as I move forward talking about this. So the first portion of our prep work came when we encountered some issues in the way that our XML finding aids from Tarot that were formatted for Tarot, they wouldn't speak directly to the ArchivesSpace migration process. So for example, a certain level of description is needed in the XML documents to go through the ArchivesSpace migration process that wasn't previously there. So we had to add certain tags throughout. Some other examples that we experienced were dates that weren't normalized, and our extent fields were not like cohesive throughout all of our finding aids. And they weren't consistent for migration. So total, there was approximately 3,000 errors that we needed to fix in about a week or two's time before that migration could even start for those XML finding aids. So doing this cleaning delayed our migration process, which in turn delayed access to the system. But this was kind of a silver lining, which I'll hit on later. Another thing that we had to address in our migration process was our previous system for accession records. We had paper accession records spanning about 40 years, and there was a mixture of formats of these accession records. So about 25 years were pretty detailed handwritten forms, and 15 years of very minimal log entries. And these span from 1967 to 2006. And for these minimal log entries, I'm talking like maybe a date that it was accessioned, potentially a title, and scope, maybe if we were lucky, and an extent. So very, very minimal information that we were working off of. So to tackle these records, we decided to transfer them to our current digital accession log, which we keep in a spreadsheet in Excel. It's very comprehensive. We try to, take all as much good data as we can. And it just made sense to have those 40 years of paper accessions into one searchable place. And just have them all, like I said, in one place instead of kind of strewn out all over the archive. Our collections were also seemingly trying their best to stay hidden, but now we keep maps of where we put them. Students worked on various projects to map out our locations and create a system that could be easily followed, allowing for our collections to be found faster. So we had a a graduate student and an undergraduate student, go through our archive and create essentially like a map in, I believe one of them was made in CAD, and like literally map out range, shelf number, so that we could add those locations into the finding aid in ArchivesSpace, and those where a collection lives can be seen at a glance. What else? Oh, so I'll kind of dig into this more in final outcomes, but these delays that I talked about that we experienced in this migration work did allow us to do this like deeper preparation, because we did underestimate its size and scope of this prep work that we would have to do, but it gave us a good foundation as we entered using ArchivesSpace.
So almost all of our finding aids that are currently on Terra were migrated. Some of them we decided not to because the number of errors to manually fix was a lot, and we didn't want to delay the implementation. And some of those are honestly things that need to be reprocessed because they were kind of messy anyways. So, but most of them, I think the total was like 832, 830 maybe, were migrated, as well as our digital accession records from 2007 to 2023. So after the migration, we had to review everything that was migrated to make sure the content migrated the way we wanted it to and the formatting was correct. We'll talk a little bit more about this in the sort of troubleshooting section, but we did have to make some sacrifices to focus on access over perfection. As anyone who's gone through a migration knows, like, it never goes perfectly, right? And so we had to make calls and decide, what were we willing to give up, and what was a non-negotiable to give the best access to our collection so we could start using ArchivesSpace immediately. Once we approved the finding aids and accession records, we wanted to connect them in the system so we could get better intellectual control over the materials. So for those not familiar with ArchivesSpace, you have the accession records, and then there are resource records, which are the finding aids, and you can actually link them in the system. So you can have this accession that is linked to a resource record. So it's connected, and you can go from one to the other really easily. So under my supervision, Special Collections, student employees went through every single accession in that 2007 to 2023 accession log to see if it already had an existing finding aid on Tarot. And
Hey,
if not,
Kathryn, I'm so sorry to interrupt. I think your audio is a little low. People are having trouble hearing you.
Can you hear me now? Is that better?
That's much better. Thank you.
Okay. My mic was down. I'm sorry. I'm going to backtrack a little bit. So post after the migration, we reviewed the finding aids. Once we approved the finding aids, we decided what we wanted to do was link all of the accession records and finding aids within the system. I'm going to repeat this just because it's like a key piece, but for those of you not familiar with ArchivesSpace, you can put it in accession records, is one of the types of things you can create, and then you can create resource records, which are essentially the finding aids, but you can actually link them in the system. And since we ingested them separately, to connect them, we had to do that manually. And so under my supervision, Special Collections student employees went through every single accession to see if a finding aid already existed, or if we needed to create one of those resource records in the system. And so our major goal was increased access. So if an accession had a finding aid, they would link it in the system and add a location note. So it was easier for the reference team to find. Like Erica said, we had already mapped out all of the locations. So they would link it and then physically go to the shelf and find it and then put that location in there. And if it didn't already have a finding aid, they located the collection, whether it was processed or unprocessed, because like most of y'all, we have a backlog. And then they created a minimal level finding aid with the location note, so we could at least provide some level of access. And so when I say minimal, I mean like title, a scope note, which was sometimes only a sentence. Sometimes there were dates if the accession record had it. an extent, because we use that in our accession records, and then the location. And then things like we had them add citations, preferred citations and things. So if people did use that collection, we could at least provide them with the materials to like actually use it in their research. If they couldn't find one of the accessions, they highlighted it in their spreadsheet for me to deal with later. Which is a common theme throughout all of this work, is these things that the students couldn't solve, I dealt with. But I took all of the accessions that we had questions about, whether it was like there was one box that they couldn't locate, or, it may have been an offsite storage, but we couldn't verify that without going there, and that takes time, or it seemed like it was actually an accretion to another collection, but we couldn't verify it without looking at the paperwork, and that's more of a staff job. So the students highlighted it, and now we have the spreadsheet of accessions that we need to sort of do some more research on. But overall, I mean, the students did really wonderful work, and we made many more accessions and collections accessible, which is really great. And Erica did similar work with the paper accession record she talked about earlier, so I'm going to let her share about that.
Yeah, so like Kathryn said, I did very, very similar work, but echoing back to that prep work that I did with the paper accessions, it allowed for a lot easier like copy and paste workflow whenever it came to inputting these accessions into ArchivesSpace. Instead of kind of transcribing them as I went into the system, it just having them all in that one place was vital. And then from there, once they were inputted, either linking them to an existing finding aid or creating a minimal level description for those items, just as Kathryn said, our students were doing for accession records that were already in the system. We did speak to ArchivesSpace about creating kind of a separate spreadsheet for these paper accessions for them to ingest. And while that was a possibility, they kind of warned us that there would be a greater margin of error than if we just did it manually and did it ourselves. So that's kind of why we took this tedious one-by-one approach of inputting those paper accession records. So like the workflow for the students, I worked to reconcile these accession records with our collections, processed and unprocessed. Those that could not be linked or verified were highlighted for needs more research that our archivists will kind of tackle at a later date. Taking this one by one, again, tedious approach allowed us to also inventory what we held ownership of in our collection. There were a few instances where I came across a collection that was noted to, it was an accession that we brought in 1972. It was noted to only be on loan, but I didn't have any paperwork available that showed that like a complete transfer had been made to us and we actually own this material. So we had to do some digging. And after some digging, we were in fact able to verify that we did own this material, and we were able to place all of that documentation into one place instead of having it scattered all throughout the archive, and kind of creating a better process. And again, noting what we actually own was kind of an unexpected outcome of this, but was super important. All right, so we have done all this hard work, and it has culminated into the debut of our instance of ArchivesSpace, and everything has changed. So despite delays, we met our original March 30th deadline that we kind of set for ourselves for our initial implementation. Our archivists have integrated ArchivesSpace within their processing workflows, creating all of the finding aids in the platform, as well as creating the required collection structures that allow for easier access for our reference team. On this note, our reference team is also utilizing ArchivesSpace to not only help find related collections to help researchers with their projects, but utilizing that location functionality within the platform to be able to easily find collections at a glance rather than chasing down where they might be. Here at UTA, we not only have our collections located in our stacks on site, but we also have an extensive offsite location that houses a good amount of our material. So having that note and the location functionality of it just makes it so much easier for our team to see at a glance where that collection might be housed. Not only for our reference team, but for our archivists whenever they're working with a researcher or faculty or creating exhibits. So once all of these functional processes were fully put into place and we felt that the backend platform was well established, we updated our website to include our ArchivesSpace links and announced ArchivesSpace to UTA library staff on April 3rd, 2024. And while we have documentation for our backend processes, we are still in the process of planning instruction sessions with our liaison team for the faculty and student research coaches that will work with the wider campus community on how to use ArchivesSpace. We're also working on creating instructions for the public on how to use and search ArchivesSpace. Our marketing team is also working together with us to create a dynamic rollout across UTA campuses and then reaching our broader general public through social media platforms. And that will probably go out in fall of this year, so fall 2024.
Sorry,
oh,
y'all.
Kathryn, there we go.
Yeah, sorry, there was a pop-up and then I tried to click out of it and then it opened it another window.
All right.
Okay, sorry, let me get back to my spot. I was just saying how I hadn't seen any technical difficulties in this whole conference so far, and then it's me. That's the problem. I'm gonna try to attempt not to make a Taylor Swift reference right there. Okay, so we did face some problems, but unlike Taylor, we were able to solve them, or at least come up with a plan to solve them. So one of the issues that we faced was staff turnover. If you noticed, we started this very early in 2022 and did not really start like working with lyricists until late spring or early summer of 2023. And part of that was because 3 people from the original committee had left, 2 of them in special collections and 1 of them in our IT department. And so we had to wait to get those positions filled to really move forward in many of those stages because we wanted to make sure that like the folks that were going to be using them, whether they were brand new or had been here for 10 years, were a part of that decision-making process. Like I said, it didn't just impact special collections. And so staff turnover was a unexpected issue, but taking the time to really like wait for those positions to get filled, so we knew we were making the decision with everybody's input. It worked out okay, but I think this is something that libraries and archives face a lot anyways, but in this instance we were thankful to like recover and do this on at least not too long of a timeline. Another issue that arose was the ethics of temporary positions. So Erica, at the time we started this search, was interning in special collections over the summer. And she was a grad student at the time, wanted to hire her in a student position. We wanted to request it in the budget, and she's graduating in December. So we were like, perfect, this will be like great time to like, that's 4 months to work on the implementation and be able to keep her on staff as a student employee. But due to some changes in our budget, we didn't have the funds for a graduate student. And so the library had been utilizing temp positions in some cases. And so when that was proposed, like ethically, I was having some feelings about it. It's come up today in several of the sessions about project positions and temporary labor, and that was something that I was trying to grapple with because we wanted to keep Erica on staff, but not I didn't want to hire a contract archivist for this because I wasn't a fan of it in the beginning. But in this case, so Erica was graduating in December, and so her student employment would have ended then anyways. And hiring her as a temp worker instead of a student worker allowed us to pay her more and allow her to work more hours because they put a cap on student hours. It's like, I don't know, 19 hours a week, which is just, that's not even enough to live off of on those salaries either. So in this case, and because this was a temporary position. Like this was just meant to assist with the migration, not with the implementation piece happened a little bit like starting in January. And so we did make that call, but it was an issue that like I didn't expect to have to grapple with. And it worked out, and we're very happy that we're able to hire Erica to the libraries full time. Not in special collections, unfortunately, but it was one of those things that we were so sure we could hire her as a student. It didn't even cross my mind until we got the budget back, and they were like, yeah, we don't have the money for that. And so we had to make that call and consider, the ethics of that, because now there's a precedent set for hiring temporary labor in the department. And so you just, it's one of those things you have to consider with these sort of project-based work. I mentioned sacrifices we had to make during migration, and that we had to make calls quickly about what we were willing to fix manually later and what we wanted to try to correct during the migration process. One example is the way our extents were written. The way that it migrated is not the way that it goes into the ArchivesSpace system, but when you look at it on the public side, it looks fine. So we decided didn't impede access. We're just going to leave it as is. And the students actually corrected that while they were doing their work earlier this spring. We had to make calls like that about like there were double commas because we added commas for tarot, but then ArchivesSpace automatically adds commas. And we were like, okay, it's not the most sightly thing in the world, but is it going to prevent someone from being able to read it? No. Is it going to, if we have them update it programmatically on Lyris's end, how much extra time will it take? The answer was much longer than we were willing to wait. And so we had to make a lot of calls like that. But overall, our goal was access over perfection. And so that's what we strive for. And then lastly, going through things going back to 1967, we knew that we would run into issues caused by outdated procedures and record keeping, but I don't think by we I mean I really realized how many problems there would be to solve that just came up on a regular basis. From January to April, while our students were doing a lot of this, like finding the locations of where this exact box was at, I was their main point of contact. And so I spent a lot of time trying to track down information about collections because we wanted to solve them in the moment, because part of the reason that, things were in the state that they were is because sometimes you say, oh, we'll take care of that later. We'll update that later, and they don't get updated. And so like I currently have, I don't know, 15 Post-its spanning my two screens that are like, look at this collection, try to find this box. Why is this written this way? Because of these things that are continually arising. And this work is still ongoing every day, but every day we're also, able to gain better control of our collections and make sure they're described in ArchivesSpace and make sure they're accessible to the public through those descriptions. So those are a few of the issues that we faced, but I think that as a team we handled them really well, and our archive is much better for it.
So despite all our kind of like unexpected issues, we did have some great outcomes from this project. So overall, we were able to prepare and migrate 832 finding aids and 1,273 electronic accessions. These are immediately available and searchable through ArchivesSpace. And we also added a total of 435 processed and unprocessed collections that have been made available so far. So these 435 are on top of what was already accessible through Tarot. So we've already drastically expanded what we had accessible in our collection. So we've also added 1,500 paper accession records that are now accessible and searchable in that accession log spreadsheet and also in ArchivesSpace. Like I said earlier, these records date back to 1967. So having those available in this format rather than binders and binders worth of paper is a major improvement. I feel like that's something a lot of us can relate to, and less paper taking up space in our already paper-filled archives is kind of a win. So this project, which I think is kind of a really cool final outcome that we've come across, is it's given our students great hands-on experience using ArchivesSpace, and it will help them if they choose to move forward in an archival career, but also in any career that uses a content management platform. As a recent graduate of December 2023, who was on the archival job hunt, most job descriptions require some experience with ArchivesSpace or a system like it. So giving these students like hands-on experience that they can add to their resume has been a really neat final outcome that we've ended up with. But most importantly, our end game goal is that it gave us the opportunity to expand access across our collections. That was one of our ultimate goals, and I feel we have greatly achieved it. And it's also created a precedence for future modernization projects with for UTA Special Collections, and how we kind of approach further accessibility for our archival materials.
And finally, lessons learned, because you can't go through a project like this and not learn a few things. I mentioned this one earlier. Advocating for yourself is key, and knowing who you're advocating to is really important. So, we knew our admin team was really data driven, and so we used a data driven approach to make our case. As archivists, we tend to be really passionate about our work, which is wonderful. But passion isn't what was going to sell this, and we knew that, and we knew that the data is what would get their attention. And we were right. And so being able to show them, like, this is what the system will cost, but this is, how much time we're wasting with these things that are currently in place. And so knowing who you're advocating to and what they're looking for is just as important as speaking out. Setting priorities to guide your decision making is also key. Erica, our director, and I set priorities at the very beginning. We knew that getting a handle on our materials physically and intellectually were like number one, and access to those collections that we were putting into the system. So it allowed us to pivot when we needed to and make decisions to further that. So when the collections had double commas and they were, because of how they were formatted, we felt okay being like, okay, we're going to fix this after the migration rather than wait weeks for them to do it programmatically. And I also just want to say Lyrasis was really awesome throughout the whole migration process, and they would have done it for us programmatically, but we just were conscious of Erica's time in that temporary role, and conscious of our time and how fast we wanted to move the timeline forward.
So I'm going to sound like a broken record, but we learned quickly just how vital this prep work would be on this project. While we didn't quite expect to spend months combing through and transferring over paper accession records or mapping out our space for locations, it really provided a strong foundation for us to jump, then fall from once we finally got access to the platform after that initial migration. It also allowed us to put the very best information into the program that we could. ArchivesSpace is very much a you get out what you put into it platform. So doing that work allowed us to just get our very best outcomes possible. And to the sentiment that Kathryn was talking about of priorities, we found it vital to stay flexible in our planning. We did hit a few roadblocks like we've talked about, but found that if we kept those initial goals in mind, we could pivot in ways that still kept meaningful work happening rather than allowing the project to stall out. Even the best laid plans can crumble, so keeping that flexibility allowed us to stay the course and stay positive about it as well.
Yeah, I think staying positive throughout the process was really important. To paraphrase our inspiration, we've learned that stressing and obsessing is no fun. These big migration projects are really time consuming. Things go wrong, timelines don't work out. And so I think just going and knowing that and being okay with the imperfection along the way, it helped a lot, because I am one of those people that's like, I want to do something, I want to do it really well. And this was challenging at times because it absolutely didn't go how I planned. And I had planned a lot. I wrote a lot of documentation, and it still veered off course because of things we couldn't control. And so, by the end of it, I think, that lesson of like, imperfection is okay, that idea of good enough, right, that we've talked about today and at multiple archives conferences that I've been to, that good enough is okay. So you may be wondering, is it over now? Not quite. We still have time for questions. I'm going to stop sharing.
That was really great. I loved every one. That was so good. So we've got a couple of questions. The first one's from Matthew Peak. When adding resource collection finding aids records, did you choose to add notes fields first and come back to containers? Or what was your approach in dealing with the time-consuming part of adding containers for non-Tarot EAD finding aids?
So for those, for like the minimal level finding aids, we just did a collection level description. And so we didn't add containers. It's something we're working on now because we're working on getting actually all of our collections barcoded. And so our students are doing some prep work right now to go in and add containers for collections that don't have them. They're literally going like box by box by box. But in the moment, we literally just had them do the collection level description in the resource record. And the only notes we added were a scope note, which oftentimes came over from the accession record. And then, oh, I'm trying to think what else. The location note, I'm drawing a blank. Preferred citation, and there may have been one other one, but I think that may have been it. And when I say minimal, I mean like bare minimum, but we have a list of things that basically it's helping us set our priority list for the backlog, because now we can go in and see everything, even if it's unprocessed.
Awesome. And then an anonymous attendee asks, had you not received the funding, would you have moved forward with a free version or a much cheaper CMS? Why or why not?
Ooh, that is a tough question, because I think with the free version, right, the time and like knowledge it would have taken to set that up, we would have had to work really closely with their IT, which they're wonderful and would have done it, but they're like incredibly overburdened. And that's part of the reason that we wanted to go with the hosted version. But I mean, if they hadn't approved the funds to do this, then we would have looked for cheaper options first, I think, before going to something that we would have had to do more setup with ourselves, just because like staff resource wise, like I was really, until Erica came on in her position, I was the only one who was really working on the migration. Some of the special collection staff did some prep work, like reviewing some XMLs, just so we can say, okay, add this to the migration list. But so I don't think we would have been able to do it like actually reasonably with the without that hosted option. So we probably would have looked for something less expensive, or advocated more. We didn't have we had a different dean, so we would have waited till the new dean came in and asked again, maybe. I don't know. It's a tough question to ask, because I don't know what our path would have been exactly.
And Amanda asks, could you describe your approach to adding location information? Do you have more than one repository in ASpace? Do you add location information such as room, shelving, barcode?
Yeah, so we don't have more than one repository in ArchivesSpace, so everything's under UTA Special Collections. And the way we did it, so we realized, so you can add like locations to individual boxes, right, to the container instances. You can go in and add like the barcode and create locations for that. And we did that, but then we also created notes in the location, or created a physical location note. So on the user side, like our reference team doesn't have to go to the back end. They can just look at the front. And we separated it into, so we have our offsite storage, which is called the LCD. And at the moment, we just put LCD. We did not go like down to the shelf. That's something that's in the future. For things in special collections in the stacks, our library abbreviation is SPCO. So it says SPCO, and then it's the range number, dash the section number dash the shelf number, and it's just as simple as like number dash number dash number. And then our cold storage vault downstairs is just CS with the same thing, number dash number dash number. And we're in the midst of that project Erica was talking about with the shelving. One of our staff members is working on, literally, we're going to put labels on all the shelves with those numbers, so that, because I don't know if y'all have ever tried to count in stacks. We realized once we started this, we needed labels because we were like in the middle and having to walk to the end to be like 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's just as simple as that. We didn't want to make it too complex. But in ArchivesSpace, it says like range 1, section 1, shelf 1, because we thought that that would make more sense in the system. But on the public side, it's still that number dash number dash number.
All right, and then one more. Do y'all have plans to go back and go more in depth in the finding aids, or are you planning to keep those ones with minimum description as is, as like access over perfection?
There is a plan. I have so many plans. We basically, so some of those actually have like finding aids that were created by students or volunteers or staff that were like never approved by previous staff members in charge. And so I have a list of all of the ones, because some of our processed collections don't have that, they still have minimal level description. And so first step is to go back, and anything that's actually processed and on the shelf, to create the finding aids for those. And then for the unprocessed things, they will get, as we work our way through our backlog, which of course will take a long time, but they will get full descriptions. But we've given the staff, the reference staff especially, sort of like free will, like they all have access. And I'm like, hey, if you pull this collection a ton, like you could make it a student project to do the inventory and upload it yourself. Or if you want to add subject headings just to make it a little bit more accessible, you can. And so hopefully eventually we will have gone back and gotten all of those. But I think the first priority is the sort of processed collections that don't have a full description or an inventory, or they do, but they're just not. They're sitting in a SharePoint folder somewhere, and so I'm trying to collect them all, so then we can have a student do data entry, and then sort of use the other ones working with our reference team to figure out like how to handle the backlog on sort of a, what are people asking for most? What should we process first?
That sounds like a good approach. That's all I have for the, oh wait, nope, there's more. More have popped up. Do you have any plans on implementing the use of events functionality or workflow management?
Yeah, yes, no. It's something that we want to make a part of our normal workflow, but it hasn't been, like, we haven't discussed it yet. And I think part of that was just trying to get past the initial migration. And then we have our sort of like outreach team and archives unit team unit is what we call it. And so like once we kind of catch our breath after this initial like migration and implementation, the goal is to kind of figure out, okay, how do we really want to use the system? Because the events function can be really useful. And especially with our past of thinking information that was lost, right? That can be critical. So we do want to, but when that'll happen, we have a Microsoft Planner that is very extensive. So all of those things are on there, but it's just like, when will we implement it? I'm unsure.
And Paul asks, their archive Baylor is looking at migrating from another CMS to ArchivesSpace in the next few years. What do you know now that you wish you knew at the beginning of using this system at your institution?
Erica, do you have anything? Because I mean, you worked heavily in the migration too, and I know I've been answering a lot of questions.
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of saw that question pop up, and I was trying to like think of it as you were answering that last question. I feel like First of all, I wish I would have been privy to like their terminologies for things. We very much had to get used to like parent-child spawn, resource record instead of finding aid. So just kind of getting used to that terminology that we weren't already using in our everyday like jobs in our special collections. So that's kind of like a dumb one, but that's something that it took me a while to get used to, was using that terminology. And then something that I wish we would have known beforehand was, I don't know, I guess all the prep work that we had to do. I know that I keep saying that, but like it took up a lot of our time. And like Kathryn said, my position in special collections was temporary. And so I only had a 4.5 month span to get all of my work done on this project. And while we were able to pivot and still make meaningful work happen, just not being aware of all of that prep work, really, I wish we would have known ahead of time so we could kind of plan for that a little bit better and not have to pivot on the fly. Do you have anything to
Yeah.
add?
Yeah, and I think most of like what I wish I would have known doesn't necessarily, I mean, there were some adjustment with the ArchivesSpace terminology, even like resource record. When I did the training with the rest of the staff, I was like, and by this I mean finding aid, and like, so we're still adjusting to that. But I think most of what like I wish I would have learned was more about that prep work phase. Like we were simultaneously trying to, because we're like shifting things in the back, and there are like a lot of other projects going on that aren't directly related but sort of impact it, like um like if somebody moves a box but we've already put the location in but it's not like fully implemented yet, like it seems really silly, but things like that, and just getting everybody on the same page of like this is happening, and like you're in the middle of transitioning but work still has to continue, so having a way to communicate, so you don't end up in a situation where like I said, I mean, that's a really like small example, but where you don't end up in a situation where, like I said, a box has moved somewhere else, and then you're like, but it says it's here in the location, and so that work just kind of disappears because no one was communicating. So I think that's the big one, is to try to think of all the things that might be impacted by this shift, and make sure that if something's going to happen, that's okay, but like whoever's doing the migration or whoever's working the system needs to be informed so things can be updated on both sides.
For sure. I'll also add that like we did a lot of cursing of archivists from 1975 and a lot of kind of just cleanup of work that we didn't know had been done to our archive, and undoing just old processes to make this modern version work for us. And like Kathryn said, while also still trying to do work and be processing archivists. And then there was something else. Oh, as far as like going from one CMS to another, we didn't obviously have too much experience in that with this instance, because we were going from just like an Excel sheet and paper accessions and things like that to now this CMS platform. I will say we are doing another CMS manager migration within the library in a different department, and metadata cleanup, that has like been just peak. Be prepared to clean a lot of metadata, even if it like exports fine from whatever your original CMS platform is. There's always going to be something that you're going to have to clean, and just making sure that you prep and like plan for that in your migration timeline is going to be vital for sure.
And Paul did just add, like in general, like non-archive specific migration, but I feel like you both kind of touched on that at the end. But if you had anything to add that wasn't archive space specific to migrating to a new system.
No. Oh, and I guess I would add documentation.
Yes.
Documentation, like all day, every day, right? Like I have created, I don't know how many training guides for the staff, for like the temporary work that was happening, for the students, for our like workflows that are now implemented, like acquisition to access. Document it all, and document the decisions that you make about whatever system you use, because and like we like to think that like we'll remember, but like staff changes, people leave jobs, and so just having a record, like I saved the Basecamp chat from so we can be like, oh, this is why this happened. Like when I'm like, oh, why does it display this way in the system? Oh, because this is the way we migrated it, right? And it just document as much as you can for yourself down the road, and so archivists aren't cursing you, even though I think that's just like it's what happens. But you know we have an ArchivesSpace folder, and it's like implementation where a lot of the stuff is stored, and then like like regular budgetary stuff, and then like as that grows we'll keep adding things to it. But
Yeah, I feel like our philosophy with documentation has been like, if we disappeared tomorrow, could somebody else pick up this work and it make sense? And so far so good. I mean, we're not disappearing anytime soon, but I feel like that's just been our philosophy, is like, could somebody with no experience sit down and take on this project?
Yeah, for sure. I did want to mention to folks, if you haven't been paying attention to the chat and you wanted to glance at it, there's been some resources shared for importing data and things like that amongst folks with that sort of experience. So yeah.
Will we get a copy of the chat? Because there's a couple, like someone mentioned something about a code to fix the double commas, and I'm like, oh, but there's so much in here that I haven't.
So I can send you that code.
Oh, I didn't even see the name. Yeah, that would be lovely.
And generally, the ArchivesSpace Google group is fantastic, and it has a vast archive full of things where whenever I was doing ASpace implementation by myself, I found like a lot of great things that help me clean up data and figure out how to make the system work best for us. So that is something I recommend. It's just like a free resource if you're not like an ASpace community member.
I need to, when they first gave us like the access, there was a weird, because like it's all through my UTA email, but like I have my Gmail, and so I have not gone back to try to sort through that, because we've just been like focused on migration, but that's a good thing to note.
Someone asked, how can you join the ASpace Google group? I don't remember off the top of my head, but I can add things back to the resources in this session. So if you'll circle back to this session and look at the resources afterward, I will be happy to add a link to how to do that. Because I don't remember off the top of my head right now, and I joined in like I think 2017. So yeah, not to jump in on your session here as the random moderator.
No, that's fantastic. Like, no, I mean, I feel like that's also one of the things that like there's like we called people and we're like, hey, how do you like using ASpace? Like, is yours hosted? Are you hosting it yourselves? Like, what are the pros and cons? So like then when you're in, like, we did all of that work, but since we've been in the system, we haven't really done that. So like having other folks who know this because they've been using it longer is helpful. And yeah.
And just one more comment. This is what SSA is about: crowdsourcing and sharing with each other. I have strong agree for that, definitely. I think that's a good place to close, unless you have any final comments you want to share.
No, someone put a question in about sharing documents. I'm just going to put my email in the chat. I would love to share anything that anybody has. Just email me, and yeah, that's what this is about, right? The like, we don't need to recreate the wheel. We don't need to hide all of the work. So if anyone needs anything or anything that we talked about, you have questions about, just send me an email. I'd be happy to share any documentation we have. Make things easier so you don't have to go through the same unexpected issues we did.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. This was great. And I hope everyone has a great rest of the conference. Right. And come to Snappy Hour tonight. Okay, bye.
Bye.